Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. Um, Pretty exciting. If you weren't here on Palm Sunday, you should look back on our YouTube channel for our Palm Sunday. I thought it was pretty good. Um, why the palms? Why Hosanna? Why would they call those things out? And the tradition behind it, and just the importance of why that would be a habit, and they would be calling out Hosanna, God save us. And So that's really, really good. If you're watching along, you should join us Sunday for Easter. Just be in church. It's Easter. It's a great time to be back in church. And so that's a great time. Um, this week we're going to continue on. I've titled this week "Struggling with Security," and there's a reason for it. But as a backdrop of kind of where we've been, we've talked about um, the sign of circumcision. It's the first time that God gave the sign of the covenant between God and his people to his people to hold on to. Before that, he had always held on to the sign, and God was going to provide the sign, which is absolutely backwards from everything else they'd ever done. The people who were powerful lorded their power over the weak, and it was for the weak person to provide the sign of the covenant, to have mercy given to them. But overwhelmingly, God continues to not just provide the sign of the covenant, but provide the mercy in response to his own sign, which is really, really cool. Um, Even the covenant of the blood path that that Abraham and God made together, Abraham wasn't even a part of it because he knew he didn't have anything to offer. So um, where we left off last week was uh, God providing the ram, right, on the top of the mountain, and that was in Genesis 22. We went through chapter 18, or no, yeah, chapter 18, chapter 21, and chapter 22 last week. Now, you will notice that we did skip over a few things. We're going to reference chapter 20 uh, later on today, and that's going to be important. But we did skip over Genesis 19, and there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that later. Now, we saw Isaac was born. Isaac, the son of promise, has come, and in the meantime, between this story and chapter 23, we're going to see the death of Sarah, of Sarah. It is significant. It is a happening. It does give us um, measuring point, but it is um, something to consider there. Now, what happens next is where we want to pick up the story. Abraham is getting really old, right? He is really getting advanced in years, and Isaac is still this young man who is single. And if you're separated and set apart, and God has called you from the place of your home and called you out of it into this land of strangers, uh, who's left? Right? There's not a woman available realistically for Isaac to marry. Go ahead. Yeah. Like, there would be women, but it would be this intermarrying process. And what we see later on is God says, don't do that. And we've reviewed some of that why, right? And when we talked about Avram leaving when his name was Avram, before it was Abraham, him leaving the house of his father, we always think, well, it was after his dad died, but if you read the story, it wasn't after his dad died. It was before his dad died. He leaves dad's house. He leaves Terah's house. And part of what he left behind were the gods of his people, of his father's house. And he's leaving all of those gods behind to hold on to what we would reference as the one true God. So now, here he is, the first in a generation, in a people that are supposed to cling to God. And he has a son, this son of promise. But that son's going to need a wife. Otherwise, that's where the lineage ends. Right? And that's where we pick up the story. In Genesis 24, Abraham was now old and well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the chief servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand underneath my thigh. It's a weird place to put your hand. Like, I'm just telling you, guys, don't put your hand underneath my thigh. Fairly awkward. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites. I hear this conversation from Abraham as he's getting old. You know, as you age, your appearance changes, but there's a certain point where mentally you get to a point where you can see the end closer than the beginning, right? And I think it takes a while to get there. But once you get there, there's some things you're like, I should probably have some things in order, right? You start thinking about things that you want to be in order before you go. And if you're in Abraham's position, I hear in this reflection from him, I need the chief of my household to be committed to my son and committed to carrying out my will. And if something happens to me before my son finds a wife, I need someone who's there to be in charge to understand it is not going to be from this group of people that we're stuck in the middle of. Right? This is the call of Abraham. He has him put his hand under his thigh, and in the Jewish tradition, that hand under the thigh would be a replacement for a certain other body part. Because he's saying, put your hand under my thigh as a representation that you are connected with the covenant that God has made with me. The sign of the covenant, which is on a much more private part. Already uncomfortable enough, put your hand under my thigh. But that's what it is. That's the inclination here. That's the insinuation. That is the implicit conversation going on. As a connection to the commitment and the covenant that is the sign of the covenant between God and me and my house, my chief in charge of all the things in my house, don't get a wife for my son from these people. Among whom I am living. But you will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. Because I think, again, if we look back, remember we talked when we looked at Genesis 12 and the call of Abraham away from his father's house. His father had left Ur of the Chaldeans away from his family, and he stopped at Haran. And that's where he ended up dying. But he was headed in the direction of the land of Canaan, right? So potentially, Terah was called to come all the way to the land of Canaan. But Abraham left his father's house and came all that way. And so he needs someone for his son that comes from that lineage, that has something different about them. And so, so then what happens? What happens when you find a spouse? Generally speaking, what happens even in today's world when two people get married? Generally speaking, they end up, I would say, they end up close to one set of relatives. Right? Unless they're both from the same area. Like if two kids who were born and raised in the Nowata area and their families are from the Nowata area, they get married, they're probably living still close by. And they're close to both sets of relatives. But if somebody's moved off and two people meet at college and they're not from the same place and they decide, hey, I really like you, we should get married, we should commit to this the rest of our life. The next discussion is, so where are we going to live? Well, we can live close to my parents. Well, we can live close to my parents. Well, we can live close to my parents. Yeah, well, we can live close to my parents. And generally speaking, the woman wins. So isn't this the question that is being asked from the leader of the household? He says, what if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country that you came from? He says, Abraham says, make sure that you do not take my son back there. This is going to be like an echo that comes back later that we're going to see why. Why is this all left behind? We're going to see that later on. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, so that if you get a wife for my son from there, so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there. He's like, hey, you're going to go on my behalf. God's going to go before you and provide a wife for my son. And that woman's going to be willing to come back. And if that woman is not willing to come back, you're released from your oath. You are free to live your life. You are free from the servitude that you serve me under. You're free to do whatever you want. You're a free man, if that's the case. So first of all, it's a pretty strong declaration from Abraham, right? That this is what's going to happen. The angel of the Lord's going before you, and he's going to provide an heir. He's going to provide a wife from my father's house. And she's going to be willing to come back here. Pretty rare occasion. Hey, I'm going to send you as a servant, not as the patriarch, back to visit my family. And they're going to let a daughter leave with you to go marry a guy that he's never met and that you're not actually the father of. Seems legit. If that is reasonable, I am a prince from Africa. I'm just kidding. What? He believes so strongly that God is going before him that he makes a declaration that a man who is a servant is going to go into a foreign land to speak to distant relatives of his master, and they are going to give up a virgin bride to travel into a land to marry a person that she has never met before from an estranged family member who has not come to negotiate a bride price and has made no covenant about a bride price and what he's going to do and what he's going to provide. That's a pretty bold statement. And then he doubles down on it and he says, if it's not the case, you're free. So he trusts God so much at this point that he's like, it's going to happen. Like, this is a miracle if we really sit back and listen to it. Because the reality is, the household of Terah, which is Nahor, that would still be in the land of Haran, that's the security place for this woman. That's the place of provision and safety. And a slave, a servant, has to go to the land of Haran, to this household of an estranged family member that he hasn't been a part of and hasn't had relationships with in years. He has to go back there and convince them to give up a daughter to come to a foreign land. To leave all of that security, all of that safety willingly. Well, he does end up paying something if you read. Yeah, but there's no representative from the household. Like, this is very out of order. Normally, the father and the potential groom would go negotiate with and meet with and make a covenant in front of the father of the bride. And none of this is happening in this instance. So what happens? Well, what happens is the servant leaves. He takes 10 people with him. And as he's coming into town, he prays. And he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, give me success today and show kindness to my master Abraham. He's praying to the God of Abraham, have mercy on Abraham. He's like, I really don't believe this, but I'm willing to pray because my master does. And so, see, I am standing beside this spring, which really it's like a well and probably more like a cistern. So it's not like clean water. It's like stairs down into a pool that they have a bucket or a jar and they bring water out of. Okay. And the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, and she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too. Let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Understand what he's asking? It is an extremely specific prayer. Also a miracle prayer. Think about this. Do you know how much it takes to water a camel? A lot. And depending on the size of jar that this young lady is carrying, giving water to the servant would be like in the first trip. But to water his camels as well could be as many as 50 to 100 extra trips up and down those stairs into that cistern to draw water. So what he's asking for is not only for this woman to be willing to leave her household. Not only for them to be willing to release her from the household without meeting the patriarch or the potential groom, but he's asking God to have gone before him, so much so that when he asks for a drink, without having to ask for these camels to be watered, she will willingly water these camels. Sounds an awful lot like 60 pounds of flour to me. This man knows the household. He knows how his master treats visitors. He knows the standard of this household and what it looks like. And he's asking God to provide a wife for his master's son that meets the standard of his master. That's correct. This is why, right? He is in the place where that standard originated, which is why the children of Abraham, this is why Abraham is sending his servant back to that family to find a suitable spouse for his son, because that's what it takes. See, we get this backwards. We get so caught up in taking care of ourselves, even in the way that we worship. Like, that church just isn't right for me. Like, they don't sing the songs that I want them to sing, or the atmosphere is wrong, the preacher's too young, the preacher's too old, the congregation's too old, the congregation's too young, the style of the building is wrong. Like, there's all kinds of reasons. It doesn't meet my schedule. Like, there's all kinds of reasons that we use. But at some point, it's not about us. And that's the culture of Abraham. That's the culture of his people. And what he is asking for, what the servant is asking for, is he's asking for a wife that is completely selfless. That's willing to leave her family, leave her place of security, is willing to serve without any reward, without prompting, because of the character of that person. And hopefully she likes my master's son, because that's who she's stuck with if she does. Do you have something over there? Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. He wasn't even done praying. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had ever lain with her. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up again. And the servant hurried to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, "I'll draw water for your camels too until they are finished drinking." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. Now, why would he sit there and wait after all of that? He was in shock, like, well, my master sent me on an impossible task, and I increased that impossible task by praying an impossible prayer to a God that I don't even believe in. And wouldn't you know, I wasn't even done praying yet. So yes, shock is one. Two, I would think sitting back and letting not just the words of this woman speak, but then the actions that back up the integrity of those statements. It was custom for, well, yeah, and I'm going to get into that on Sunday, but it's definitely custom for the women to draw water. And it would have been custom for the women to draw water and water livestock. But it would not have been custom for a woman to draw water for a stranger. That would not have been the custom. She would have been well within her right and her security to have drawn the water and not talked to that man at all and just walked away. But that's not what happened. So then she's given some bracelets and a nose ring and asked, "Who's your father?" And here's where I drew this out. Terah is the father of Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran died, and he had a son, Lot. And he also had two daughters, Milcah and Iscah, right? Remember that conversation back from Genesis chapter 11? And Milcah married Nahor, and Iscah, who is Sarai, again, see video from Genesis chapter 11. Abraham marries her. Abraham and Sarah end up having Isaac. That's their son. Nahor marries Milcah. They have a son. They had more than one son, but they had a son named Bethuel. And Bethuel has at least two kids, Rebekah and Laban. This guy's going to come up later. That's why he's mentioned now. Rebekah is the brother or the sister of Laban. This is why he was here still. So Rebekah is the one who meets the servant at the well. And she just keeps watering and keeps watering and keeps watering. Not complaining. And so, please tell me. Oh, he says, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring, weighing a beka, and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. And then he asked, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" Because he has 10 servants with him. It's not just him by himself. He's just the leader of 10 servants. And here's what's interesting. What Abraham was what he was betting on God was the chief, the leader, the most experienced, trained helper in his entire household. The one who, with beyond Isaac and Abraham, would have been the most powerful person in the entire household. He was risking losing that person to find the right mate for Isaac. Like, that's a pretty significant act of faith. Almost as significant as walking up the mountain with a boy and some wood and no offering. And so she answered him, "I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, bore to Nahor." And she added, "We have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night." And the man bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives." So he brings them all in. They come into the tent of Laban. He tells them where he is. He says, he sits food all before him, and he says, "What are you waiting for? Eat." And he says, "I'm not eating until I tell you the story of how I got here. Until I tell you why my master came, I'm not feeding myself. I'm not doing anything else. I got to tell you what's going on." So he tells Laban. So Laban is the brother, which tells us what? Somebody's dead. It has to be Bethuel. His father has to be dead. Otherwise, he has no business negotiating for Rebekah to leave. So Rebekah's mother and Laban are in this conversation with this servant. And Laban's hosting these people, and he tells them this whole story. Verse 47, it comes on, and it tells the whole story. I asked her who she was. She said, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. Then I put the ring in her nose, and the bracelets on her arm, and I bowed down and worshipped the Lord. I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right road to get the granddaughter of my master's brother for his son. Now, if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so I may know which way to turn. And Laban and Bethuel answered, This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. Sounds an awful lot like, here you go, see you later. When Abraham's servant heard what they had said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing, gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. The next morning, when they got up the next morning, he said, Send me on my way to my master. But her brother and her mother replied, Let the girl remain with us 10 days or so, then you may go. Is he going to let her go? Not if he lets her wait 10 days. If he lets her wait 10 days, what's happening? This sounds an awful lot like what we're going to get to in the book of Exodus. Moses saying to Pharaoh, just let the people go out into the desert, 3-day journey, and let us worship God there, and then we'll come back. They were never going to come back if you let them go out in the desert. This Laban character is a sneaky guy. He is a cheater and a liar. And he is all about himself and what he can get out of it. Because he knows, hey, I've promised this woman, I've promised my sister, but he knows the exact same thing that Abraham knows when Avram and Sarai go into Egypt. Hey, I'm going to tell him you're my sister. See what I can get. If he gets 10 days for this virgin sister of his, he can start shopping her around. And I just got some pretty good stuff from my great uncle or whatever, right? Maybe somebody else who's local will give me more. I don't have to give that back, right? He feels like he's in a place of leverage to negotiate for Rebekah. Well, too late. Verse 56, but he said to them, do not detain me. Now that the Lord has granted success to my journey, send me on my way so I may go to my master. He's asking, hey, I've got to get back to my master. This is already done. We've already negotiated. Everything's done. Send me on my way, and the only way I'm leaving is with that woman. Then they said, let's call the girl and ask her about it. So they called Rebekah and asked her, will you go with this man? Like, it's very out of place. It's like you're in a private conversation and you're like, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll just ask her. if she wants to go. This is the old classic. If my kids ask me and I really don't want to give them the answer that they don't want, hey, go ask your mom. And we can ping pong them back and forth with, I don't know, go ask your mom. I don't know, go ask your dad for quite a while here. We can delay this conversation until it's too late. Yeah. Laban's rethinking what's going on here. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Well, and here's the thing. If he didn't eat and stay the night, if he had just eaten and left after dinner, they probably don't have this conversation. There's a lot of things that we commit to in the moment that when we sleep on it, we're like, man. Yeah, he gave her expensive stuff for drawing water. And then when she's committed as the bride, and I think Laban isn't as blessed as Abraham, which I think is pretty clear. Like Abraham's rich. Rich enough that just for drawing water, she got $20,000 worth of gold bracelets and a hefty nose ring. And then he committed. Yeah. And then he committed her. Then Laban commits her, and he starts seeing what's offered, and he's like, man, my family must be loaded. And then, then he sleeps on it, and he's thinking, man, that rich uncle, if this is what he sent with his servant, if I hold his servant up, and he has to come here, how much more is he going to give me? Like, you ever, I feel like this is a great association. Have you ever gone to a car dealership and been like, I'm just looking, and then you end up negotiating the price, and you pay, and you agree on stuff, and you sign everything, and you drive the car home, and you wake up the next morning, and you're like, I think I paid too much. Start looking around, and you're like, I definitely paid too much. Stuck in it now. Pretty tough to turn back around and get yourself out of that contract, right? But they hadn't taken delivery of the car yet. The girl was still on property, right? The exchange of goods, they hadn't taken delivery. Hey, I know this is what we agreed on, but yeah, it's still our property technically, and based on the changes in the market overnight, it's going to cost you another. Well, how much more does your master have? Right? And it seems like it seems as if mom is involved in this chicanery too. Anyway, so they say, let's call the girl, and she says, I will go. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the gates of their enemies. Then Rebekah and her maids got ready and mounted their camels and went back with the man. So the servant took her. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. It's Roi at the end means God who sees. Anyway, he went out to the field one evening to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. And Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, who's the man in the field coming to us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, And he married Rebekah, so she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. We're going to skip the next part and come back to it. But this is really a challenge of security. Like Laban had the security of having this virgin sister and being it being his Badov, it being his household, was valuable. But Rebekah had to willingly give up that security of that Badov to follow the direction of what God was leading Abraham in and Isaac in. Because this is really about Isaac, right? But the faithfulness of Rebekah just says that the offspring and the family of Terah, that hospitality, that selflessness, that chutzpah, that something different, it comes from right here. And there's a reason that God chose them. So it's pretty significant. But then we see this crazy happening that I want us to walk through for just a second, and then we're going to have some time in discussion. In chapter 26, we're not going to read it for sake of time. But chapter 26, something happens. Kind of sounds a little bit familiar. There's a famine in the land. So here Isaac and Rebekah are they're married. They've got 2 kids. Dad has passed away. So it's Isaac's Badov now. He is the man, the leader. He's providing for this household. He's been left behind 318 trained men as servants in his household or more. And there's a famine. And he's in this place called the Negev, which is kind of the south end of Israel, which is really desert-y. And he has a choice to make. Where's the natural place to go? Egypt. Dad went down to Egypt once. He also went to the land of the Philistines once. So from the land they were in, where'd they go? Oh yeah. Isaac went to, they say Avimelech. It's Abimelech is how we say it. He went to his kingdom. It was the king of the Philistines in Gerar. And the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt." Hey, we've been down this road before. Mom and Dad went down to Egypt. Don't do it. Because we don't need another Hagar. Right? So he says, don't go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and will give them all these lands. And through your offspring, all nation on earth will be blessed because Abraham obeyed me and kept my requirements, my commands, my decrees, and my laws. So Isaac stayed in Gerar. So he did something that his dad didn't do. He stayed in Gerar. This Avimelech is king. He's got a wife and 2 kids. He says, I got a good idea. We're going to stay here because God told us to stay here. But we need to tell people that you're my sister. It's like a running family thing, I guess. And if you read Genesis chapter 20, you see this happening before Isaac is born. That Abraham is in this land of Gerar, meets this king named Abimelech, and tells him, hey, that's my sister. So Abimelech says, oh, it's his sister. So he takes her to be his, like to sleep with her. And God shows up and tells Abimelech, hey, that's a married woman. And Abimelech's response to God is, I did this unknowingly. I'm innocent in this. He's like, I know you did. God's response to Abimelech is, I know you did. That's why I'm stopping you from bringing guilt on yourself. And he had afflicted all of the people of Abimelech's house. The women were barren. So I don't know how long this happened. So Abimelech calls Abraham back to him and he says, why'd you tell me this woman is your sister? This is your wife. You've brought all this atrocity. You almost made me sin. So he says, I got it. Here's your wife back. Here's a peace offering. Here's 2,000 pieces of silver for Sarah for anything that you have seen or any hurt, that you are restored now. Because that's the way that justice is from the east. It's restorative justice, not retribution justice. Not retributive justice. Ours is retributive. Retributive. That's our justice. If somebody kills somebody, they go to jail. In their system, somebody kills somebody, not only do they die, but their family has to pay some type of price of restoration. There's a restoration of the process. So that's what Abimelech does. And so in response to that restoration, do you know what Abraham does? He prays, and God heals all the people of Abimelech's house. So here we are 5 chapters later, or 6 chapters later in Genesis 26. And this man named Abimelech, which literally translated means, my father is king. Anyway, sees this beautiful woman and this man. He's a little more tentative at this point in his life to just take random women who come in from out of town and be like, hey, she's pretty. I'm going to take her as my wife. I don't care what anybody says. Tell me they're your sister. That's fine. Cool. We'll see. I've been burned by this thing before. And that's what they told everybody. She's my sister. And then it says that they see Isaac caressing or rubbing the back of or comforting Rebekah. And they're like, clearly she's not your sister. So he gets called before Abimelech and says, hey, why'd you tell everybody this is your sister? That's clearly your wife. So he makes this decree. Don't anybody, and he says, well, I told everybody she's my sister so that you wouldn't kill me because of her. So we've had this same thing happen, right? Abimelech says, don't touch her. Nobody touch her or touch him. If you want her as your wife, get over it. Nobody touch him. So they live together in harmony. And it says that God blesses Isaac and his household and makes him rich. Matter of fact, it says that he planted crops in that land, and in the same year harvested 100-fold. 100 times what he planted, he harvested in the first year. Yeah, any farmer, that is a significant thing. So, things moving, yeah, in a drought. In a drought. And so he's being blessed, and things are happening. And do you remember what happened in Abraham's journey? He went to Egypt, says she's my wife. Things go much worse for Abraham than for Isaac. Abraham ends up being sent back out of Egypt with all of this stuff, and God blesses him. And what happens? Abraham's flocks grow, but so does whose? Lot's. And then there's quarreling between them. Well, Isaac's household grows and gets stronger, and Abimelech's people go, this isn't going to work. This guy's stronger and more wealthy than all of us. You can't stay here. Now, typically, if you go to someone who is stronger and more capable and has more power than you, and you say, hey, you're pretty strong, you can't stay here, what would be the response of that person? Make me. Hey, you're going to have to leave. Oh, you're going to have to make me. It's almost a challenge, right? But what does Isaac do? He does what Dad did. He leaves. Here's what's crazy, though. In this land, as he wanders, he says, all right, I'll go to a different place. So he goes to a different place and he finds this well that his father dug, and it's stopped up. So he digs it out again. His servants dig it out again. So he has water, which, if you're living in the desert, if you don't have water, you're dead. So in this desert place, having to maintain his flocks, he's digging up, he's redigging these wells and giving them the names that his dad gave them. And now he's provided for. The people of the land go, hey, that's our water. These people who have already admitted, hey, we're weaker than you and lesser than you and have less than you, are now going to challenge you over the water. So what would a normal person do? All right, hey, you told me that I needed to leave, and I didn't need to leave. Like, you had no grounds for me to leave. You just were scared of me and didn't like me for some reason. But I decided to leave, and I went my way, and you went your way, and I dug this well. And you saw me prospering here. So now you're back here to tell me that I can't have this water? Okay. Let's fight. Okay. We would start throwing down the gauntlet. We would start arguing. Like, isn't that natural? Like, who says? Like, God gave me this. God blessed me with this. Let's go. God, where are you? Where's the fire and brimstone from Sodom and Gomorrah? Like, these people are oppressing. You said these people, anybody who oppressed you, that you would oppress me and my family, you'd fight against. Anybody who blessed me, you'd bless. But anybody who cursed me and oppressed me, you'd oppress them and you'd curse them. It's time to start ponying up, right? Like, they can't stand in the presence of God. We'd start demanding our own way and start trying to write out a rule book of, hey, this is how things are going to go. But not Isaac. He says, okay, you can have that well. He goes on his way, and he digs another well. Finds another well that's been stopped up, and he redigs that one. They come back to him again, and they say, no, that's our well. He says, all right, you can have it. And he goes on his way, and he digs another well. Finally, they find rest. Those people leave him alone. But not after he had multiplied in their country and been asked to leave. And he dug well after well after well after well. And did all the work for those ungodly people, for those not people of God, to have it as a reward. He continually gave up the security of what was in front of him and refused to hold on to it as his own. And it's the opposite of what happened. It's like the reverse of the story of Abraham, right? And you know what he does at the end? When he finally finds rest? He pitches a tent. And he builds an altar. He builds a tower to God to celebrate God's name. And he says, I'm mobile. I'm willing to go wherever you want me to, but I refuse to claim anything as my own. See, the challenge that we have today in our world is, are we willing to release whatever's in front of us? Even if it's a provision of God, in order for the lost and those who don't know God to see the movement of God. Do we trust the provision of God enough to send after some impossible task and trust that God goes ahead of us? And then after that impossible task is done, are we willing to take the lifeblood and from the land that God had promised? Are we willing to take the lifeblood of our survival and willingly give it away and pursue after it again? Or are we committed to fighting for our own security? And our own blessing? This is the overwhelming challenge, I believe, for the Western church, especially for the American church. Because at some point we fall into a place where we are fighting tooth and nail, clawing for, demanding our own. And the character of God is overwhelming hospitality and willingly saying, yeah, this is what God has given me. This is the blessing that God has given me, but I'm not holding on to it. I know He will replace it. See, because God said that through Abraham, through his offspring, all the people would be blessed. The Philistines, who are a problem later on, they're blessed because Isaac dug some wells and refused to hold on to those wells. Refused to fight over water. You know, in today's world, in America, there are more states' rights. There are more fights over water, even today in America, than over pretty much anything else. Water rights and mineral rights are still a fight today. Still a fight today, right? Yeah, 1956. Family member killed because he wouldn't let water run from his ranch to the neighbor's ranch. Wow. Yeah, Boone Pickens. He just said Boone Pickens bought up water rights all over West Texas, like whole counties worth of water rights. I mean, it's still a thing. When you don't have all the the pumps and aquifers and all the other technology that we have, how much more a thing to try to survive in the desert. And this is the call of God. This is the challenge for us. Like, this is what it is for us to chew on. Will we have the character enough to not hold on to what is ours, not to demand our own, not to take people to court over a demand of what's our own? And will we accept what God gives us? And will we move in the direction of God and not hold on to it? So we're going to spend some time in discussion. Come and join us at Easter this coming Sunday. Start about 10:30. I always say 10:30, but about 10:30. Come and join us.